15. Discuss the formation of various latitudinal heat zones of Earth. Also, account for the different patterns of isotherms in the two hemispheres. 15. Discuss the formation of various latitudinal heat zones of Earth. Also, account for the different patterns of isotherms in the two hemispheres as well as on continents and oceans. Approach. Discuss the formation of different types of latitudinal heat zones. Explain the patterns of isotherms in the two hemispheres as well as on continents and ocean. Answer. The latitudinal heat zones of Earth are majorly governed by variability of the insolation at Earth's surface and geoidal shape of the Earth. However, the boundaries of the zones are finely delineated by taking into account a role of planetary lines and ocean currents which maintain heat balance on Earth. This gives rise to the three heat zones on the Earth's surface. Toric or tropical zone. This zone lies between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. The apparent movement of the Sun during a year is between these two latitudes. The Sun's rays here are almost vertical and it receives maximum insolation. Temperate zones. This zone lies between the Toric zone and the frigid zone. It shares features of both the surrounding zones. Sun is never directly overhead, thus it possesses moderate temperature. Frigid zones. Here the sun rays fall at low angles because the sun does not rise much above the horizon. Thus, these zones are the coldest regions of Earth. The temperature distribution on Earth is represented with the help of isotherms, which are the lines joining places having equal temperatures. They generally lie parallel to the latitude due to the pronounced effect of the latitude on temperature of an area. However, they take sudden bends where land-water contrasts are maximum. Thus, there are deviations in the isotherms in northern and southern hemispheres. Pattern of isotherm in northern hemisphere. In the northern hemisphere, the land surface area is much larger than in the southern hemisphere. Hence, the effects of land mass and the ocean currents are well pronounced. In January, the isotherms deviate to the north over the ocean and to the south over the continent. This can be seen on the North Atlantic Ocean. The presence of warm ocean currents, Gulf Stream and North Atlantic Drift, make the North and Atlantic Ocean warmer and the isotherms bend towards the north. Over the land, the temperature decreases sharply and the isotherms bend towards south in Europe. These deviations are more pronounced in January than in July. In July, the isothermal behavior is opposite of what it is in January. Isotherms bend forward over the land mass as they are overheated. Pattern of isotherm in southern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, the effect of the ocean is well pronounced. Thermal equator lies to the south of geographical equator. Here the isotherms are more or less parallel to the latitudes and the variation in temperature is more gradual. However, the gradient shows slight bend towards the equator at the edges of the continent as shown in the figure. 16. Illustrate the process of natural carbon sequestration. Why has there been a growing emphasis on artificial carbon capture and sequestration (CCS)? Discuss the risks associated with it. Approach. Define carbon sequestration and explain the process of natural carbon sequestration. Briefly discuss the concept of artificial carbon sequestration and enlist the reasons for its growing popularity. Mention the risks associated with the artificial carbon sequestration and 16. Illustrate the process of natural carbon sequestration. Why has there been artificial carbon capture and sequestration (CCS)? Discuss the risks associated with it. Approach. Define carbon sequestration and explain the process of natural carbon sequestration. Briefly discuss the concept of artificial carbon sequestration and enlist the reasons for its growing popularity. Mention the risks associated with the artificial carbon sequestration and conclude accordingly. Answer. Carbon sequestration (CS) refers to the long-term storage of carbon, usually that carbon that has the immediate potential to become CO2 gas in plants, soils, oceans and other geological formations. It can be natural or artificial. Process of natural carbon sequestration. Natural CS is a continuous cycle of absorption of atmospheric CO2 such that a balance of CO2 is maintained in the atmosphere for sustaining life. Animals, plants at night, forest fires, volcanic eruptions, etc. release CO2, while the forests, oceans, oil/gas reservoirs and biomass are the carbon sinks that absorb for it. Photosynthesis is the most important mechanism of natural CS. Of the carbon emitted to the atmosphere by human activities, only 45% remains in the atmosphere, about 30% is taken up by the oceans, and the remainder is incorporated into terrestrial ecosystems. Figure 1, Natural Carbon Sequestration. 18 www.visionis.in Copyright Vision IAS. Artificial carbon capture and storage involves capturing waste carbon dioxide CO2 from large point sources, such as fossil fuel power plants, transporting it to a storage site, and depositing the CO2 to atmospherically isolated locations, usually an underground reservoir for long-term storage. Figure 2, Options for artificial carbon capture and storage. Artificial CCS has been gaining prominence due to the following factors. Using natural CS waste is a slower process and also competes with other land use purposes. It is a potential means of mitigating the contribution of fossil fuel emissions to global warming and rectifying ocean acidification. It has also attracted the attention of private players and is currently being seen as profitable business venture by some of the venture capitalists. Artificial CCS has immense potential to increase the agricultural yield and enhance soil recovery. Supply chain for CCS will create large variety of jobs. Jobs will be created in core engineering, manufacturing, design, management and operation and other skills related to water storage. However, following the risks are associated with artificial CCS. IPCC has estimated that carbon capture and storage would increase the cost of electricity generation by about 1 to 5 cents per kilowatt hour, depending on the fuel, technology, and location. It is relatively unexamined and its side effects are still unknown. For instance, late in Ios, Cameroon, Africa disaster, where magmatic eruption dissolved carbon dioxide CO2 suddenly erupting from deep lake waters produced huge amount of CO2 killing hundreds of people and livestock. Since it deals with compression and transportation of CO2, therefore, it is costly and energy intensive. Process of ocean sequestration will make oceans acidic, thus affecting the marine life in unknown ways. Overall, direct air capture combined with natural carbon sequestration will serve as the insurance against the effects of excess atmospheric CO2. Alongside, focus needs to be on enhancing the scope decentralized activities such as afforestation, renewable energy resources, and eco-friendly habits for containing the CO2 emission below 400 ppm. 17. Despite the damages, forest fires are a natural and necessary part of the forest ecosystem. Discuss. In this context, do you think there is need to have a relook at India's no forest fire policy? Give arguments in support of your answer. Approach. Briefly discuss the harmful impact of forest fires. Discuss how forest fires are advantageous for the forest ecosystem. Highlighting the flaws in India's forest fire policy. Discuss the need for a relook at its policy. Answer. As per State Forest Report SFR 2015, out of 70 million hectares of forest covered, more than 54% of forests are vulnerable to fire due to natural and anthropogenic causes. Forest fires destroy many acres of natural vegetation and cause significant damage to human habitations. It forces the animals to migrate or get extinct within a short span of time. It also leads to soil erosion and landslides. Cash flows if accompanied by heavy rains occur in the aftermath of a forest fire. However, natural forest fires are intrinsic to forest ecosystem and serve many purposes. Support new generations. Some species of trees and plants are actually fire dependent. Some trees have fire-resistant bark and cones that require heat to open and release seeds for regeneration. For e.g. chaparral and grassland plants. Cleaning the forest floor. Fire removes slow-growing underbrush, cleans forest floor of debris, reduces resource competition by opening it up to sunlight, and nourishing soil. Prevents large fires, Clearing underbrush from forest floor with low-intensity flames can help prevent large damaging wildfires that spread out of control and completely destroy forests. Provide habitat and increase biodiversity. Fire clears forests of heavy underbrush, leaving room for new grasses, herbs and regenerated shrubs that provide food and habitat for many wildlife species. When fire removes a thick stand of shrubs, water supply is increased, benefiting other types of plants and animals. Killing disease. Fire kills diseases and insects that prey on trees and releases valuable nutrients, thus enriching the soil. Soil regeneration. After hill forest fires, fertilizing ash from fire washes down to fields with monsoon rains, which increases soil fertility. Currently, India follows a no-fire forest policy. The Forest Department has historically prevented forest fires in order to protect timber stocks. However, this one-size-fits-all approach is not suited to Indian conditions because early dry season fires burn less hot and are less detrimental to vegetation than peak dry season fires, which burn much hotter. It also destroys invasive plants like lantana that act as a fuel for spread of fires in the Western Ghats region. By classifying forest fires as penal offense, Forest Department gradually legitimized forests as timber and wildlife production systems and ignored the cultural and livelihood significance of the forest ecosystem. Thus, there is a need to relook at no-fire policy and reorient it in the light of ecological and local knowledge systems. Instead of viewing forest fires as being purely destructive in nature, policymakers should view fires as being both rejuvenating and revitalizing. 18. Despite environmental impact assessment, the IA being critical to attain the goal of sustainable development, it is still beset with number of issues ranging from the manner of its conduct to implementation of reports. Comment. Approach. Give a brief introduction about environmental impact assessment and its importance for sustainable development. Mention the issues in IA from the manner of its conduct to implementation. Give a brief conclusion with some changes that can be brought into the EIA. Answer. Environment Impact Assessment. The IA is an important tool for sustainable development. It refers to the integration of environmental concerns into developmental process right at the initial stage of planning and suggesting necessary mitigation measures. This ensures optimal use of resources, minimum social and environmental risk. It involves collection of relevant data, consultation with experts, evaluation of projects, mandatory public hearing, preparation and submission of environment management plan and a project report to the ministry. However, the IA in India is not conducted in a proper manner. In fact, there are allegations that it is not even undertaken in some projects. For example, certain constructions in Sardar Sarovar project, Amravati project, etc. The IA is mired in a number of issues at various stages of impact assessment. Determining site. Environmental consultants appointed by project proponent don't have sufficient insight into prevailing socio-economic and ecological problems of the site in most cases. Many times ecologically sensitive projects circumvent EIA process through threshold limits exemptions in the Act. Unclear guidelines regarding the processes of screening and scoping in EIA notification, 2006. Conducting study, the baseline data is often insufficient and application and prediction tools used are often inconsistent. At times, adverse impact are ignored for the economic benefits such as Setu Zamyagram project clearance overlooked the impact on supporting coral reef ecosystem through increased shipping activity public hearing. There is a generally lack of awareness among local people, but at times, the evidence of persons opposing the project is not even recorded. Project report. The report is not made in local language and sometimes it is not placed in public domain for scrutiny. It often avoids mentioning some important information. For e.g. dam construction in Awak district in Unickel Pradesh which affected the wintering sides of black-necked crane, a protected species whose name was not included in EIA project report. Monitoring and implementation. An audit report by CAB in 2017 on environmental clearances reflected the non-compliance of laws and laxity of regulation so much so that in 7% of cases, construction was commenced before the environmental clearance. Apart from these, the IA is generally conducted over a short period of time which is inadequate to understand the existing environmental status and trends of the area. The aforementioned fallouts tend to reduce EIA to merely a bureaucratic procedure. To make sure that EIA process ensures sustainability, many steps should be taken, such as greater transparency, timely availability of reliable and authentic data, ensuring accountability of regulators, conducting of EIAs by independent accredited professionals, independent environmental regulators, and improving the quality of public participation in decision-making process. 19. Explain with examples how the changing land use pattern has increased the risks of hazards turning into disasters. Approach. Describe hazards and its potential to turn into a disaster. Describe and write about the changing land use pattern. Discuss the impact of changing land use patterns on the hazards. Conclude with suggestions. Answer. Hazards are natural phenomena and they occur at regular intervals. When they are uncontrollable, they turn into disasters. Recent scientific inventions like improved hazard monitoring, early warning system, etc. have helped in mitigating adverse impacts of hazards, but land use changes have turned hazards into disasters. Land use pattern has undergone transformation due to impact of urbanization and population explosion. Economic development has resulted in divergence of agricultural and forest land to industrial and infrastructural activities. These changes in land use pattern have brought associated ecological changes also. Major population agglomerations are located in hazard-prone areas along coasts or on floodplains, etc., which increases the exposure of urban populations and physical assets to flooding, storm surges, land movement, tsunami, etc. In recent times, several disasters attributed to land use have occurred. In coastal areas, mangroves are natural barriers against strong wind and storm surge. However, cutting of mangroves on eastern coast for aquaculture has increased the exposure to severe landfalling cyclones. In Mumbai, replacement of rich mangrove ecosystems with hazardous construction led to 2005 floods. Chennai floods of 2015 and floods in Bengaluru and Hyderabad have also shown that a haphazard land use change without appropriate attention to ever-disappearing drainage system has become a major contributor to disasters. Unplanned development pattern and uncontrolled urban sprawl without appropriate escape routes turn minor incidents into disaster. E.g., frequent fires in slums and urban areas of Mumbai. Major floods in Uttarakhand in 2014 and Kashmir were a result of unregulated building practices and unplanned development encroaching the riverbed. Thus, National Disaster Management Plan 2016 needs to be earnestly implemented for significant outcomes, as it calls for vulnerability analysis along with remedial measures. 20. Critically assess the current status of implementation of provisions of Disaster Management Act 2005. Approach. Discuss about Disaster Management Act 2005 and elaborate status of its implementation. Analyze the critical gap in the approach and framework of the National Disaster Management Authority and the NDMA and associated entities. Briefly conclude with way forward. Answer. The Disaster Management DM Act 2005 is an important milestone in the evolution of a legal framework for disaster management in India. It emphasizes prevention and mitigation of the effects of disasters through the holistic, coordinated and prompt response. The current status of implementation of provisions of DM Act 2005. Many institutions have been established under this act. These have helped tourism and aided in successfully handling the cyclone Phailin. Almost all states have prepared a state disaster management plan. Over the years, National Disaster Response Force has established itself as a visible and reliable response force to provide specialist response during disasters. Its efficiency has been appreciated world over. However, still the implementation of Act has some issues. All states and UPs have created state disaster management authorities as DMAs, but with the exception of a few, most exist as a mere formality in the form of a committee. 7 states including Uttarakhand, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat, etc. failed in implementing DMF in order to handle natural catastrophes. States failed to constitute advisory committees on disaster management preparedness as well as state disaster response force. National Executive Committee to monitor the implementation of disaster management guidelines meets infrequently even in the case of disasters. NDMA failed to publish annual reports and update plans regularly. No major project taken up by NDMA had seen completion so far. There is a lack of functional integration among concerned agencies. Financial management of disasters is undertaken as per the mechanisms available in the Act 2005. However, the National Disaster Mitigation Fund (NDMF) has not been set up to address the above issues. Following the steps may be taken. Clear delineation of roles of different agencies to increase efficiency. Empowering NDMA to enable it to discharge its responsibilities more effectively. Setting up a cadre of disaster management professionals and expanding their training facilities. Moving from simple forecasting to impact forecasting. Implementing new disaster management plan and providing minimum standards of relief to affected people.